Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, Chag Sameach, if you're observing the Feast of Trumpets, aka Yom Teruah today. For many others, that's a month away. So in this video, we're looking at 2 Kings chapter 9, in which there are 37 verses. And the title of this video is Drive Like Jehu, which is a famous band that named themselves after this chapter. So in verse 1, we see here a cruse of oil, which means a pot or a jar, versus a box of oil. Verse 2, we have a significant difference here. It says, bring him versus carry him. So direct him to the secret chamber versus to physically lift him and carry him into the room. Verse 5, a message versus an errand. And an errand in the Hebrew means, or can mean, speech or word. Can include those terms. So you'll notice that with Hebrew, it can include many different meanings, a lot of connotations to one word has many meanings. Verse 7, utterly destroy versus smite. And there's an addition of that I may, and in the Septuagint, the prophet is taking vengeance for Hashem. Notice that. Verse 8, the blood that was shed, in reference to this, at the hand of the whole house of Ahab. Verses, for the whole house of Ahab shall perish, which means Ahab is equally responsible as Jezebel was, according to the Septuagint. Verse 11, there's an omission of fellow. Verse 12, wrong versus false. So it is wrong, this is wrong, versus it is false. It's a false testimony, false statement, versus it's being judged as wrong in terms of right or wrong, correct or incorrect. Verse 13, we see trumpet versus trumpets, which in all honesty, each man had their own trumpet. Verse 14, defending versus kept, and the Hebrew word for kept is shamar. Verse 15, if your heart is with me, versus if it be your minds. So if you share the same passion or opinion, versus if your opinion is of such an opinion. One fugitive versus escape, and the footnote reads in the Greek, one having escaped. Verse 16, rode and advanced versus rode in a chariot. It says that he was getting healed, Joram was, versus he lay there. So he just lay there, wasn't getting healed, wasn't getting treated. There's an omission of the following, of the arrow wounds wherewith the Syrians had wounded him in Ramath in the war with Hazael, king of Syria, for he was strong and a mighty man. All that was omitted. Verse 17, went up versus stood. So in the Septuagint, he is taking initiative because he saw Jehu, versus he was already standing there in the tower. He saw the dust versus he spied the company. So he's got a gang with him. Significant difference, it says here, let him say peace or shalom, versus is it peace? Verse 18, turn behind me, which may be a Hebrew idiom, such as get behind me, Satan, for example. But it means in our modern vernacular, you are dismissed. So basically, Jehu is telling him, you're dismissed. So that is the reason why the watchman left, because Jehu dismisses him, and apparently he spoke with authority that the messenger wasn't present anymore. Verse 20, the driver drives Jehu. Now, this is probably better rendered in the following way in the English Standard Sentence. I'm going to render it this way. Jehu, the son of Nemesi, the driver, comma, drives, for it is with furious haste. Now, I order it that way because Hebrew tends to put the subject after the verb, or the name after the verb in a lot of cases. For example, here am I. Verses in the Masoretic, it says, the driving is like the driving of Jehu, which alludes to the title of this video in the thumbnail. For he drives furiously, so that makes sense in both. Makes a little less sense in the Septuagint unless you reorder the sentence around. Verse 24, he bowed upon his knees after he was shot through the heart. And he sunk down in his chariot. Verse 25, chief officer versus captain. And then it says here, ground of Naboth versus field of Naboth. Okay, we're in verse 25. I and thou remember versus you remember, or remember how. So he's basically speaking to Badakar or Bidkar. Verse 26, portion versus plat. And this word plat in Hebrew, chelka, can mean portion, property, field, ground, piece of land, or in our modern vernacular, a plot of land. So there's an omission of I pray thee, and then a continuous difference of portion versus plat of ground. Verse 27, we see an omission of and one smote him in the chariot. And we see the name of the place Ai versus Gur. 29, king of Israel. Joram, king of Israel versus Joram, the son of Ahab. So we can see Septuagint gives him more of an air of kindness. Doesn't associate him with the son being the son of Ahab. Verse 30. So this is Jezebel coloring her eyes. She colored her eyes versus painted her face. So the Hebrew of this word face is ayin, which I believe the word for face in Hebrew is panav. But ayin literally means eyes. So she literally put makeup on her eyes in order to accentuate her physical attractiveness or beauty. So yeah, it makes more sense in the Septuagint. And then it says adorned her head versus tired her head, which is yatab, which this word can mean to adorn, can mean to make good, to make better, more specifically, to dress up. In our modern vernacular, we'll say do up, or a makeover is another way to understand this. So she had a makeover. She colored her eyes, adorned her head. She looked different than the usual Jezebel, I would assume. Okay, verse 32, significant difference. We see Jehu speaking to Jezebel, and notice his statement, who are you? Who are you? He doesn't recognize her. And then he orders her, come down with me. And then two eunuchs show up out of nowhere, it seems. Verses, who is on my side? Who? So is he speaking to Jezebel? Maybe, maybe not. But in the Septuagint, he did not recognize her clearly. So he asks her to join him so that he can inspect her, perhaps, or maybe to get her to join him. Versus, who is allied with me? Who's on my side? Or we can also understand it as, who are you on the side of me that's speaking to me? So it can be interpreted two ways. And then we see that two eunuchs looked down towards him, versus, and there looked out to him 2 or 3 eunuchs. So it's not exactly sure as to the number. Verse 33, they trampled on her, talking about the horses, versus he trode her underfoot. So the horses possibly supernaturally trampled on her, and supernaturally meaning that Adonai, that Hashem inspired the horses, put into the horses' minds and bodies to do this, to trample on Jezebel's body. Because we see shortly after, dogs actually consume her, most of their corpse. Versus Jehu on his horse trode her underfoot, so trampled her. So it's interesting that we see horses plural. Okay, and that's it. That's all for this chapter. So I'd like to thank you for your time. Until next time, I bid you all Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, Irini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum, peace be unto you, and Maranatha.